Bashir, CEO, RB Soft, with Aga Ali Raza from LUMS. To the stage, get ready for enlightening discussion, the future of education in the era of artificial intelligence. So over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. So as the audience kind of trickles in, I think this is the perfect opportunity to just give an abstract of today's discussion and introduce my panelists. The integration of artificial intelligence in the educational realm has spurred a transformative wave, reshaping pedagogical approaches, learning experiences, and assessment methodologies. While AI promises personalized learning trajectories and efficient administrative functions, concerns about data privacy, equity in access, and the potential dilution of the human touch in education persists. This session today seeks to dissect the multifaceted role of AI in modern classrooms. From AI-driven educational apps to intelligent tutoring systems, how is this technology revolutionizing learning? Are we prepared to address the ethical and socio-cultural challenges that it presents? To answer these questions, I'm joined today by three esteemed panelists. I'll start with Ms. Ayman Bashir, who is the CEO and co-founder of Outclass, which is a Pakistani edtech delivering high-quality, scalable education for K through 12 Pakistani students. Ayman is one of the leading women in entrepreneurs of Pakistan, securing $500,000 for Outclass with the dream of giving education an equalizer. Ayman won coveted Standard Chartered Women in Tech Award in 2019 and was the Pakistan winner for She Loves Tech Global. Ayman has an MBA from LUMS and a decade of corporate management experience in top global organizations such as the World Bank, Nestle, and Coca-Cola. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Ayman Bashir. Not related to Ms. Ayman Bashir is Yasir Bashir. Mr. Yasir Bashir is the founding CEO of RB Soft Private Limited, one of Pakistan's fastest growing software and technology development companies. In its portfolio of products, RB Soft has VR atlases, games, and interactive simulations. Yasir Bashir has been an active contributor to the startup ecosystem in Pakistan and has served as a mentor and advisor at LUMS Center for Entrepreneurship, Plan X Accelerator, Invest Innovate, and Telenor Velocity. He has advised more than 100 startups in formal and informal capacities. Yasir is also the founding member of PyCon Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, Yasir Bashir. Last but definitely not least, to my left is Dr. Aga Ali Raza. He is Assistant Professor Computer Science, Lahore University of Management Sciences. He is a Fulbright Scholar. His PhD is in Language Technologies from the Language Technologies Institute School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University, where he was advised by Roni Rosenfeld. He is also the founding director of the Center for Speech and Language Technologies at LUMS. His research focuses on speech and natural language processing, speech-based human-computer interfaces, machine learning, and information and communication technologies for development. He teaches machine learning, speech processing, and data structures at graduate and undergraduate levels. He has been a faculty member of FAST NU Lahore between 2005 and 2010, ITU between 2015 and 19, and at LUMS since 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Aga Ali Raza. Right, with that, let's get the discussion underway. So before we start the discussion on generative AI or the impact and implications of AI in education, I wanted to delve into the sources of generative AI. And what I mean by that is, what is the corpus of data that generative AI bases its responses on? Is generative AI truly bias-free? Dr. Aga, can I ask you to delve into this question?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. That's a great question. Thoda sa hum iske, maybe let's go into the background of it a little bit. So we are talking about generative AI. Let's compare that with the normal AI. So when we are training a machine learning model, an artificially intelligent model, we provide it with a lot of data where we tell it what's the right answer. So that's called tagged data, or that kind of learning is known as supervised learning. The thing which has changed with the modern methods, the large language models and whatever we have been hearing about, is that these models are pre-trained on a lot of data, the thing that you referred to, the corpus of data or the huge data set, and then we retrain or tweak it to the downstream tasks. So suppose you want to do sentiment analysis of tweets, and you're interested in your own Urdu language tweets, for example, but you already get a GPT-4 or GPT 3.5, which is trained on the entire internet of a large body of text. Now, to the question of whether it would be biased or not, it would surely be biased. Any model would be biased towards whatever was more represented in its training data. So suppose if you have trained it all on Western countries' generated data, then it does not know a lot about the specifics of situations in developing countries. If you have trained it all on data generated by men, then it does not understand the perspective of women. If you have trained it all on a particular data generated by a particular racial background, then it doesn't understand about the others. So yeah, those biases are baked into it, and we have to set up specific guardrails to prevent those biases from seeping into the responses.
Thank you so much for that. So in a word, no generative AI can truly be bias-free, that at the back end, the kind of corpus determines the kind of output. Yasser, can you potentially build on that and say how we can put up more effective guardrails and perhaps tell the audience about what a RAG is?
So I think before we talk about guardrails and what retrieval augmented generation is, one of the problems with large language models and generative AI is the problem of hallucinations, right? And hallucinations happen because these models, these AI models, do not understand the underlying truth of what they're telling you. To give you an example of what hallucination is like, there is a really fantastic TED talk that you can look up. I don't know the name of the professor. It's a University of Washington professor. But the title of the TED talk is AI can be incredibly smart, and it can also be incredibly stupid. And some of the examples of how AI can be stupid there are really remarkable. But the one that I like the best is, and I tested this as recently as yesterday with ChatGPT. With the GPT,
Got 2 jars, one 6 liters, the other 12 liters, and you have to just come up or measure 6 liters. The foundation of that question is in mathematics, where you have a 3-liter jar and a 5-liter jar, and you have to come up with 1 liters of liquid. Maybe if that is the backend information, then the generative AI is going to use an iterative model to come up with a solution. Now, let's take the discussion to a Pakistani context, Eamon, and with that, I'm actually going to ask you that for Pakistan, how do you think that the concept of education can transform with the rise and progression of AI? How will education evolve as AI grows?
Can I take the liberty of answering this not just
Sure.
with the perspective of Pakistan, but just generally what I believe about global terminology.
Trends,
So I
absolutely.
think I'd answer this question a little differently, and will go as far as to say, if I were, say, the president of one of the leading Ivy League management schools, for example, today, I would be losing my sleep. And I say that because for years and years, they have been all of these top tier management schools, and I won't get into the arts and humanities bit, but just focusing on one part of the, to like minimize the scope of the discussion. The kind of jobs that you would dream of as a top tier example se shuru kare na. The most sought after jobs in finance, in law, in management, in investment banking, whatever. All the sought after jobs that were being taken by the most sought after graduates coming from the most sought after Ivy Leagues. That whole pipeline is about to change because those jobs at the end are not going to be requiring the same number of people at least that are required today. So now coming back to your question, I think the whole definition of education is going to go far beyond what we're reading in textbooks, how we're being tested, what we're doing with our current curricula, whether that's globally or in Pakistan. And I think it's going to, the concept of education is going to change towards more critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, innovation, all of these parameters. And I also think the world is now heading towards a direction where education is not just going to be, okay, 18 years and you're done and now go into the world. It's going to be more lifelong, continuous, because AI is going to be making things so fast and so transformative so quickly that you just won't be able to do with just, ek dafa padhai ki aur faarig ho gaye. You know what I mean? So I think educational institutes will have to build that kind of flexible, continuous learning for students all over the world who want to stay at par with the tech world.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got an uncertain future in the next decade or so. And someone I was having a conversation with posed a really good question, which was, if something is Googleable, if you can Google something, should it even be taught in the classroom? If students have access to good internet and Google, does the teacher need to cover it? But definitely, I agree with you that future employers and schools are going through a bit of a soul-searching phase right now. I'll ask Dr. Agha to follow up on the hallucination question and how generative AI. Sir, how do you think we can mitigate these hallucinations, so to speak, with generative AI models, to generate the wrong answer? And also do tell us, why do you think they give us these wrong answers?
Great question. So for that, let's take a little bit of an under the hood look at how these things work. So let's talk about how a chatbot works at the very basics. So suppose you are asked, okay, let me give you a question. He turned his homework dash. And if you were to fill this dash, what would you suggest? He turned his homework dash. Now, maybe you're going to say in. Maybe someone's going to say over. Maybe some other grammatical continuation which is not semantically that good, so black. Or he turned his homework fish. No, he turned his homework wall. Doesn't make sense, right? Why do some words make more sense than others? Because we have heard certain words being used in this context more than certain other words. So this is basically simple counting. This is exactly what a large language model is doing at its very basic level. So when you say, what is the capital of France, and it says Paris, it simply counts the number of times it has encountered Paris in this scenario versus a different city. Okay, so this is how it works at its basics. However, what happened 1.5 years back that led to this recent boom of ChatGPT and all the popularity? Well, one more thing. That one more thing was that the traditional LLM was taken, and you employed a lot, so OpenAI employed a lot of human beings, a few 100,000 people. They allowed them to interact with this language model, and the language model, instead of giving them the highest probability answer, gave them the top, say, 10 answers. And the humans were required to say, okay, I prefer, for example, the 7th answer the most, and the 3rd answer the 2nd most, and the 10th answer the 3rd, and so on and so forth. And this was given back to the model to tell it this is what humans are preferring. This is known as reinforcement learning through human feedback. So as a result, what you're interacting with right now has 2 rules that it conforms to. One, give the most highest probability answer that conforms to human preference. So simple words, please the human. So there has been a paper recently. Now let's talk about hallucinations. What's hallucination in human terms? When you perceive something which is not grounded in reality, so you see something, if you see someone standing here, most likely you're hallucinating. So if you hear something, taste something, feel something which is not grounded in reality, that's known as a hallucination. For an AI, a hallucination means an answer which is not grounded in its own training data. So when it starts forming a fake world around itself and starts giving answers according to that world. Okay, so that's hallucination, an inaccurate answer. So why does it do that? Well, there are some reasons which are related to what we have been discussing before, the training data, that it simply didn't have the answer, or more importantly, it also stems from the fact that it's trying to please you. So there has been a paper recently, I would basically recommend it to everyone. The paper is about large language models and the reverse Turing test, in which they asked GPT-3, the precursor of GPT 3.5, what is 2 plus 2? And it said 5. And they didn't stop there and post it on Twitter. They basically asked it, why are you saying that? And the answer was remarkable. So GPT-3 explained that it knows that 2 plus 2 is 4, but it's following the pattern of George Orwell's novel 1984, in which the protagonist is tortured until they believe that 2 plus 2 is 5. It just wanted to impress the person interacting with it and tell it that I know about literary things. It was just trying to impress the human. So the problem was that simply asking a large language model 2 plus 2 is insufficient information. Tell it I want an accurate answer, I'm a mathematician. Or I'm a poet, I want a fancy answer. In which case it can bring its creativity in there. So just like what Yasir said, these models do not have an idea of your reality. Your conversation should make it clear to the model what exactly you're looking for, and the hallucinations would reduce. Obviously, there are other reasons for the hallucination where it doesn't know the answer, for which we can set in these safety guardrails, and also making the human more careful, that they should be inspecting everything carefully before passing it on.
Dr. Agha, that's a brilliant response. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's three things that we have to be cognizant of with generative AI. One is gaps in its knowledge. It is not just akle kul bolte hain, or end all and be all. The second is the responses are based on a probabilistic model. And the third one, what you want to hear or see or interact with. So very, very interesting. Just now Urdu ka ek muhavra hai, ek aur ek 11. And if that is entered in the back end, then 1 plus 1 might be 11. But I do want to ask you a follow-up question, Dr. Agha, which is, how good then are these models for local languages, local contexts, and niche subjects? If you ask ChatGPT to generate a poem, will it have a more Hindi-centric focus, or will it genuinely give you something in beautiful Urdu prose or verse? Sir.
Great point. So remember in the last response I mentioned about the highest probability answer and the answer which conforms to human preference. The Urdu version of ChatGPT right now has not gone through the human reinforcement learning. So in the initial days of ChatGPT, if you were to ask it for an Urdu response, you would feel that the answers are a bit disconnected. It's not carrying on the context. They're not so nice as the English answers. Later on, what they did was they started translating from the English answer to Urdu answer. So now whenever you ask it to generate a poem in Urdu, it first generates a poem in English and then translates that poem to Urdu. So it's doing that. But if you watch it carefully, if you inspect the answers carefully, if you ask it to generate an Urdu answer, it's a Hindiized Urdu answer. Because if you just inspect the internet, there is more of Hindi on the internet than of Urdu. So that's what they use for training the foundational model, the ChatGPT originally, and that's why it has more flavor of Hindi. If you ask it to generate an answer in Punjabi, you're going to find that the Punjabi has the flavor of the Punjabi from the Indian side than the Pakistani side. But again, the representation of the two languages are very disproportionate on the internet. So yeah, those are some caveats. However, I would point back to what Yasir said about RAG, which is essentially chatting with your own data. So you can ask these models to give you a response based on this Urdu book. So just upload the Urdu book and chat with that book. In that regard, or a set of books, or a library of books. And that's an amazingly powerful capability which assures you that it can give you better answers.
Perfect. So, in a word, RAG makes it more valid and reliable, the language learning models. Let's take the discussion back to the local context, to the Pakistani context. And I'll pose this question to Ms. Ayman. So how can Pakistan then utilize AI to bridge the gap with other nations like India, China, and Indonesia in terms of cultivating valuable human resources? What are these countries doing, and how far behind are we, and how can we bridge the gap with regards to AI, Ayman?
Thank you for that question. I actually really appreciate that question because I personally feel we keep talking about AI and the power of technology, and we never realize that Pakistan pe kis lens se wo fit ho sakta hai. Because I don't think AI itself is a one-size-fits-all solution. So starting with that. But I think it's a great solution or a great tool to fast track things. So back to your question, पहली तो बात ये कि आप IIT स्कूल बना दें पाकिस्तान में और आरबी सॉफ्ट से कहें कि वो उसको चलाए बिकॉज यासिर आप पे प्रेशर है थोड़ा सा. We need schools like the Indian Institute of Technology or to develop, to bring a focus on technology in Pakistan. जिस तरह हम लोग medical और engineering और उस पर अभी तक fixated हैं, we need a fixation on technology. And I'm going to talk very big picture, macro, basic baatein, which might seem obvious to a lot of you here, but we're surprisingly overlooking them as a nation. I also think this is the prime opportunity for Pakistan to catch pace with the rest of the world. And I say that because इससे पहले तक कोई इक्वलाइज़र का मौका ही नहीं आया. इंडिया आपने 1960 में IIT बना लिया था and वो हमसे बहुत आगे हैं. And India I'm using as an example because it's everyone's favorite, case study or comparison to be made कि जी अच्छा इंडिया यहाँ है तो हम कहाँ हैं and so on. But I really think that instead of seeing, okay, how can AI suddenly be implemented on Pakistan, I think we should take the other way around, the approach, and I'll talk very, very specific to education in Pakistan. I think our approach should be, okay, what are the underlying problems at grassroots level pay, what are the fundamental problems that we have, and then see how can AI fix those. How do we plug those problems? And the role AI has to play in those problems would be to fast track them. Because now we don't have the time to, for example, build hundreds of thousands of actual physical schools and fill them with teachers and somehow catch up to, become up to pace with the world. So for example, we have a curriculum problem. Everybody knows that. I think जो भी single national curriculum एक तरफ, and no comment on that, but we need a tech-focused curriculum. Use AI to do that. We have a 700,000 teachers shortfall in Pakistan. We need to figure out a way where AI can substitute for that so that we can't produce that many teachers in the amount of time that we have. We have so many out of school children. We can't keep building actual schools. We need learning centers which are tech enabled and somehow build AI enabled, learning systems or content that can fast track these problems. These are just some of the very, very, I think, low hanging fruit that we should be focused on. But yes, we have to start somewhere. So I would say start with the curriculum.
Absolutely. I think I like your statement that it is high time that Pakistan became obsessed with technology and using AI. And I completely agree with you that where we've got 23 million out of school children, and if they cannot reach school, we must find a way where school can reach them.
Here?
Of course, yeah.
I also want to share the one thing people don't realize is that we're here having a panel talk discussing AI. We know the power of AI and technology. The masses don't. And if you try to give them something top down through the government, through teachers, howsoever, and they haven't bought the idea and they're not invested in the idea, they're not gonna pick it up. आपका बिल्कुल plan fail हो जाएगा. Because you need to first build that kind of awareness and fixation and hype behind the kind of power that tech can hold. जब तक आप मैं तो कह रही हूँ आप TV shows के ऊपर ये जो game shows होते हैं उनके अंदर tech enabled दिखाएं games so that आपकी आम आवाम को पता लगे कि अच्छा okay, oh, this is something, this is fascinating. They're using a tech enabled question and answer gaming session. I don't know. I'm just as I sit here, I'm thinking of these things, but something to build awareness in the masses कि उनका दिल करे कि यार अच्छा मैंने अपने बच्चे को इंजीनियर नहीं बनाना. This person, my son or daughter, should go and study programming or something. So बहुत grassroots level पे इस वक्त problem है.
Absolutely. I guess first part of the transformation is educating and educating everyone in Pakistan. Yasir, I have a question for you, and I'd like you to qualify this statement. Why do you think teachers should embrace AI before their students?
I think that's a good question. I think part of the reason for that question is what we discussed earlier, that as a teacher, you're much more likely to, identify hallucination when it happens, right? Let's say you have been given access to unbridled AI like ChatGPT, and it just starts spouting complete crap at you, right? And as a teacher, you'd be able to tell much better than a student. Also, because I feel like the problem of equity at a teacher level might be easier, right? So if in Pakistan, I don't know, 15%, 20%, whatever percentage, small percentage of students actually have access to, let's say, AI-enabled devices, I'm assuming that a larger percentage of teachers can have access to AI-enabled devices. And it can be a leveler for teachers because if you're already a great teacher, much higher above the median, then AI can still make you great. But if you're a teacher who's below the median, then definitely AI can create like a revolutionary impact on how you teach. There are so many things that the teachers can start doing before the students can start doing. So for example, you've created your lesson plans and you're pretty confident about your lesson plans. Now you can just throw them at AI and say, do you see, given what you've learned from the entire corpus of internet data, whether there's room for improvement in my lesson plans? So it'll basically fast track your creation of lesson plan and save some time for you. Similarly, if you have hundreds of papers to grade, maybe you can do a first level grading using AI, some more time was saved. So not only is it improving your accuracy of the work you do, it's also creating more time that you can now spend directly with the students. So I think one thing we all agree on, I'm sure others can tell me if they don't agree, but none of us here believes, contrary to the popular notion that AI or generative AI is going to replace humans. But I do think that all of us believe that AI plus the professional is going to be better than the professional or the AI alone. So AI plus teacher is going to be better than the teacher, and AI plus teacher is going to be better than AI. Similarly, AI plus student is also going to be better, with the minor caveat if that AI is not unbridled, because then it can do more damage in the case of the student. In the case of the teacher, it may not do as much damage, but in the case of the student, unbridled, unrestrained AI can do more damage. And that is another reason I think that teachers need to embrace, adopt it first, and then they should get more and more comfortable with their students using like a calibrated version of AI.
For sure. Thank you for that response, Yasir. Just a reminder to the audience that we leave about 10 minutes towards the end of the session for any Q&A. We're going to conclude, inshallah, by 4:15, 4:20. So just a reminder, if you've got any questions, we can save them until the end of the session. We've talked about, the transformative potential of AI. But you see, anytime a very powerful tool is introduced, it has some dark potential as well. So I'm going to ask, the professor, the teacher, sir, in your experience, what have been some of the ways that students or other practitioners are misusing AI, and what are, we, the gatekeepers, doing to mitigate that, sir?
Great question. आपकी इजाज़त से before I answer the question, something Eamon ने जो कही थी ना, it was a fascinating thing, और मैं second भी करना चाहूँगा also with an anecdotal experience. Eamon mentioned कि even आपके game shows के अंदर अब AI आने की ज़रूरत है, because we really need to sensitize the masses both to the potential as well as the risks of careless integration with AI. ये दोनों चीज़ें ज़रूरी हैं. Last summer at LAMS, we had a program called the Future Tech Camp, जिसमें हमने स्कूल के बच्चों को बुलवाया. So they were kids from ages around 13 to 17, जिनको हम machine learning और AI की training दे रहे थे. As part of that training, we performed a small interesting exercise where we had AI versus humans. So we got a bunch of kids, जिन्होंने volunteer किया. We opened up ChatGPT, the free version, the 3.5, on the screen. And then we started asking them questions, and whoever answers first, or whoever calls out first, wins, like whoever gives the right answer first. Obviously, we also bias the questions in a manner so that humans are likely to lose. That was on purpose. So after a few initial questions, humans are winning, and then humans start massively losing, and then their blood is boiling. And then we give them an exercise. Okay, now you come up with a bunch of questions that you believe AI cannot answer. And you should have seen the energy in those kids as they came up with those things. Like, what's the name of my grandmother? Obviously, they can't answer. Okay, they figured out that the training data stopped on a particular date, so they asked questions about like things happening today in the news. Okay, and some of them came with so creative things, like if you ask ChatGPT to reverse a string like lollipop or butterfly, it misses the spellings, like GPT 3.5 does. So the thing is that that level of exposure and also finding out, okay, it's powerful, but I can beat it, that was something that we really found to be very, very useful. Okay, now coming to your question, and I apologize, can you remind me what was the?
As a professor and someone who's
yeah.
teaching at LUMS, what are some of the ways that students have misused generative AI?
Okay,
Sir.
okay. Let me first reveal something which eventually everyone's going to find out, so better get it out in the open. Right now, with the state of the art, if I were to ask the question that is this piece of writing, was it produced by a human or AI? Let me repeat the question because it's important that you get the question right. Here's a piece of writing, an essay, a report, whatever. Was it written by any human or any AI? Right now, with the state of the art, we cannot answer this question reliably. So turn it in, GPT-0, whatever. So that, don't let that be the incentive to like start copying everything. But this is where we are at. However, we are not saying, was it written by Yasser or AI, or Ahmed or AI? We can answer that training on Ahmed's writings, but not the general question, which is now no longer a good enough question. It doesn't have enough information. So that leads to the problem of plagiarism, like the massive plagiarism. You're giving out your assignments, assuming that people are supposed to do them individually, and then they can easily use an AI tool to generate those answers, and it would be very hard for you to prove that it was AI generated. So that's a big, big issue. One of the best solutions that I have come across of this problem, and again, it puts a lot of burden on my community, on teachers, all of us, is to redesign the assessments, to rethink the assessments. Now is the time. We have been doing it for hundreds of years now. Now is the time to start thinking, what's the eventual goal of this assessment? What do I want the kid to learn? Maybe it's a class where I do want them to learn creative writing, then yeah, you can ban ChatGPT for that class. You can ask them to sit in the class and write the essay. But if it's something where you believe that when they will be going out in the industry or in academia, they will be using these tools to aid them, then allow them to interact using those tools. A friend of mine at University of Michigan Ann Arbor, he modified his assessments last semester to say, okay, do this first with ChatGPT, then do it alone, then compare the two and comment. How are they different? So when you start rethinking your assessments, then you are preparing yourself for this massive integration, which is inevitable. It is going to happen. So it better prepare ourselves for that.
Dr. Aga, that's a very, very good response and very encouraging for students who have, big assignments or thesis submissions coming up. But I'm sure, universities are also going to keep on their learning curve. I want to tell a very quick anecdote as well. I was a math major in my university, and one of my favorite courses was Introduction to Poetry. It was my sanity saver. And the final assessment of that course was, the professor said, learn a sonnet, and then you have to recite it by heart in front of the entire class. And the entire rubric for assessment was connectivity, feeling, so something that you don't see in your typical assessment rubrics at all. I'm going to pose this question to Ms. Aman. Dr. Aga also mentioned that सारे मुश्किल सवाल जो है ना मैं आपसे पूछ रहा हूँ कि he said we need to rethink our assessment framework. 5 years, decade from now, how could we be assessing our students differently?
I think I completely agree with Dr. Aga when he said that it really depends on what the type of assignment is at hand. So if it's, इसीलिए मैंने अपने first answer में कहा था barring arts and humanities, because वो एक बिल्कुल different ball game है. So wherever writing is concerned, I think it's actually very dangerous to use ChatGPT or any learning model, any AI very early in your educational journey, because it will limit your own creativity and ability to write. But moving on, I think it's very, very important that we understand कि यार 10 साल बाद क्या realities होंगी of the professional world, everything other than writing or creativity. Things are going to be much faster. They're going to involve whoever is able to master the use of AI is going to be one of the top few who will be needed. So let me put it that way. Okay, you need to know how to, जो आपने बात की थी कि यार command आपकी आनी चाहिए आपको, and then that will determine. Basing my answer on that, you need to be able to have critical thinking developed, and I think projects, assessments should be based on critical thinking projects, real life simulations, problem solving, innovation, idea, teamwork, all of these things which are going to help them develop the practical application of whatever they're learning at school, because that is what will set them apart later on in life. So I think this is going to sound really horrible, but I think students need to start making their digital portfolios of sorts, because that will, not making abhi, but eventually they'll need to start making, बिल्कुल जैसे हमारे resumes और CVs होते हैं, I think, because you see, in an educational journey, once you're incorporating projects and performances and different rubrics, like you said, I think a portfolio is going to set you apart. Okay, what have been my learning, this student's learning areas, what skills has he or she developed, how have they actually demonstrated the actual use of those skills, what capabilities have they developed, and so that would be the differentiating factor, not your personal essays or statements or your MCQ based textbook questions. और हालांकि मेरी एक अपनी टेस्ट प्रेप एड टेक है, बट मैं इसी चीज़ को रिडिक्यूल कर रही हूँ क्योंकि दिस इज़ नॉट गोइंग टू बी relevant in the next 10 years, I feel.
No, I absolutely love that suggestion of students thinking about making their own digital portfolios today. And I'm going to pose a question to Yasser, who is he's done a lot in the startup space in ed tech and tech. Yasser, what attributes or skills are you looking for in your potential employee? What should a school prep the perfect employee for that you want to make part of your team?
I think that's a great question. Before I answer that question, just to add to what Dr. Aga and Eamon were saying, I came across this very, I think, the right kind of analogy here. आज से 100 साल पहले pole vaulting में, what was the highest jump that somebody could do? Do you have any idea?
100 years back, the maximum height in pole vaulting, I wouldn't know. I'd be guessing. I don't know even right now. Is it 20 something?
It's 4.1 meters, right?
4.1 meters.
Do you know what the record these days is? It's about 6.3 meters, right? So there's an addition of 2.2 meters added to a pole vault. So what changed? The technology changed, right? The pole that you were using 100 years ago is completely different from the pole that you use today. It's much more flexible. It can give you a lot more, let's say, boost when you're trying to jump. So to that question, when you've been given such powerful tools, you have to raise the bar, right? So it's this exact same analogy. You have to raise the bar for what you expect the student to accomplish. So now coming back to your question, to me, as an employer, what do I look for? I look for the same thing. Can I accomplish the task that I'm giving to you with the tool alone? Or can I expect that with the help of the tool, you'd help me accomplish something even higher or even better? So I think एक तो वो analogy होती है. दूसरी, I think something that Eamon alluded to, the number one criterion that we look for in people these days, especially in the technology vertical, is that things change so rapidly that if you have not learned the ability to learn, then you're going to be outdated very, very soon. Like, people don't realize that computer science jobs, this is probably the first year that they're actually going to go down in many parts of the world, because AI is just taking over a lot of what computer software developer below the median was doing. So unless you can retrain yourself to be above that median, you're going to be made irrelevant very, very quickly. So your fast ability to learn is most important. And whatever tools you require to enhance that ability, like we talked about this earlier, that a professional who can use these tools is going to be a professional who doesn't. So at the end of the day, you're still required to accomplish what your profession requires you to do, but can you use these tools to go further and faster? I think that's going to determine whether you're employable.
So Yasser, you're looking for someone with a growth mindset.
Absolutely, absolutely.
बिल्कुल सही, बिल्कुल सही. Um, Dr. Aga, I want to talk to you about, well, access, fairness, and privacy. You see, if you start creating portfolios and you've got a digital footprint already, and a lot of data is shared, it's for sale. In fact, recently I heard that Google had to pay a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit because they were tracking users in incognito mode. Can you give us some insights on how we can ensure privacy and security in the digital age ahead?
Thank you. Great question. I think we should certainly not overlook these aspects. जो सबसे पहला आपने mention किया है ना, that's I think closest to my heart in terms of where we are right now in Pakistan. और थोड़ा सा ज़रा ना वो है ना मोर नाचता है फिर अपने पाँव की तरफ देखता है. So let's look at our feet for a second. We are talking about using generative AI or AI to help with education. और इस पर अभी हमारे दोनों panelists ने बात की है. मैं उसको थोड़ा और perspective में लाना चाहूँगा. Right now, around 1/3 of the world population is offline. So let that sink in. 1/3 of the world is offline. They don't have access to internet. और ये जो बाकी 2/3 हैं, इसमें वो लोग भी हैं जिन्हें 2 महीने में या 1 महीने में एक मर्तबा internet access मिलती है. And we are talking about providing these people access to education using something like generative AI, which is primarily internet based. अभी ये आपके फ़ोन पर डायरेक्टली चलने के काबिल नहीं हुई हैं चीज़ें, ठीक है. अभी हम बात नहीं कर रहे उन लोगों की जो पढ़े लिखे नहीं हैं, जो लोग tech savvy नहीं हैं, who do not have phones, can't afford phones, can't use phones, and so on and so forth. So एक जो aspect इस चीज़ का आ सकता है, one of the possible downsides of this integration could be enlarging the digital divides. The people who have access, they have the potential to become better than the people who do not have access, and this is going to make the gap even further. And these are now the things which come down to the policy level. So a lot of debate around the use of AI in our everyday lives, education included, is around the policy level. How do you incentivize, enable, make it accessible to people who are right now not able to access it? Acha, ab aa jaye privacy ki side pe. Again, we'll be talking about policy here. So right now, the policy around the use of AI or human AI symbiosis in general is very flimsy at best. So right now what's going on is that a particular company like OpenAI, they create a tool, that tool messes something up, they get into a lawsuit, and they put a stopgap measure in there. Okay, my tool is not going to say that anymore. My tool is not going to say a racist thing anymore. So it's just like a stopgap measure. A unified policy around AI is not there even in the developed world. That's something that we should be striving for as soon as possible. And again, a property of that policy which sets it aside from any other policy that we have seen in the world, is that it should be very flexible, because things in in the AI world change really quickly. So you make one policy today, it will be irrelevant maybe 2 weeks from now. So you need a review, you need a new policy. And around that would be your privacy. So right now, how's your data being used? The data that you're producing while chatting with ChatGPT, if you're giving it personal information, yes, they have some sort of policy out there that, okay, this is how we're going to use it and anonymize and so on and so forth. But there's so many loopholes in there that I do not recommend anyone to put their personal data on these machines. I, in fact, don't recommend anyone to put their personal data on Facebook, but that's like my own personal opinion. But that's, yeah, so privacy is a big concern. Access is a big concern. Fairness is a big concern. Another thing that we started out with is the representation. So what about the different population segments who are not well represented in these data forms? Are your poorer segments of the society, are they well represented in the data which is being used to train these models? So would these models, when they're giving out policy recommendations, would they be catering to them? No, they won't be. So this is something that we need to somehow ensure using policy frameworks, and also the things which we need to implement at personal, organizational, and state levels.
Wow, Dr. Aga, that response is a very poignant, a very profound one. And you using policy to put a lasso, a framework around AI and technology, we wouldn't want the digital divide to grow any further between the haves and have-nots. And you know, I was watching this TED talk with Salman Khan from Khan Academy very recently, and he said, while you put safeguards on the good guys, and I use this loosely, good guys versus bad guys, you might slow down the good guys. You might slow down the professors, the startup space, the intellectuals, but the bad guys are not going to slow down. And that represents a very scary future. So, that I just wanted to put that out there as well. That policy has to give us that booster as well. It has to give good guys the chance to do better in the world. Any final comments, any final thoughts on the future of generative AI and education? I'll ask Dr. Yasser to start. Are we there already? Are we, what I mean to say is that with caveats, I know it's transformational, but what are just one or two things that we should be on the lookout for with generative AI and education?
So I think to your last comment, the thing that you were just talking about, my hope is that regulated AI, there are examples of that, right? Like, I mean, Khan Migo is a big example for people who've used Khan Academy. And the big thesis that they're pursuing is that regulated AI, guardrails that don't just give you the answer, but also allow you as an individual to get to the best answer. That allows a student to achieve learning outcomes which, let's say, unguarded AI does not. If that happens, then the guarded AI plus the student will hopefully beat the unbridled AI plus the student, right? So my hope is that those systems become better and better. Bias goes down. Hallucinations are controlled using techniques like retrieval augmented generation. And I just expect that the future would be really, really bright for everybody.
Thank you, thank you. Iman, any comment on education, teachers, students, with regards to PD?
Very, very short comment. I want to end my contribution to this panel talk on a very positive, optimistic note, because with AI, generally there's a lot of nervousness everywhere around. Future mein kya hoga, current kya hai, guardrails, this, that. I just think, while all of that is true, I think there is still a lot of potential in, like I said, fast-tracking solutions. And when you look at it from a very, very selfish, Pakistan-oriented lens, there really is no other way we can ever catch up to the world unless we adopt these technologies, chahe usme ho ethical issues, I know baki duniya mein bhi hain, but I just think we should be really, really fixated and focused on how can we really use these instead of being wary, and so wary that we just don't get on that bandwagon. So that's my only parting thought of optimism.
Absolutely. Don't get paralysis by analysis. Do make the change and hope for the best. Dr. Agha, a final word?
जी बिल्कुल मैं इस पे in fact let me take this opportunity to answer a question in public which I get a lot in private. So parents as well as professionals as well as others, they keep coming to us and say कि जी should we give up whatever we are doing? Should we start learning machine learning, data science, technology? We get people who say कि मेरा बच्चा बहुत अच्छी पेंटिंग करता है, मुसव्विर है बहुत अच्छा, should they just give up? उसमें तो क्या रखा हुआ है खुदा ना खास्ता, अब जो है वो आप क्या IT करवा दूँ मैं इसको और मैं machine learning की तरफ ले आऊँ? Absolutely not. Let me give you an example. Think of the time जब farmers हल चलाते थे बैल के साथ अपनी fields के अंदर. उसके बाद mechanized vehicles आए, tractors आए, tractor चलना शुरू हो गए. Let me ask you a simple question. Who runs the tractors? Mechanical engineer जिसने वो बनाया था? Farmers जो पहले बैल वाला हल चला रहे थे या ट्रैक्टर खुद चल रहा है? इसमें आपके सवाल का जवाब है इस चीज़ का. आज अगर आप सब कुछ छोड़ के सारा का सबके सब लोग मशीन लर्निंग और एआई की तरफ आ जाएंगे, एक ही फील्ड की तरफ आ जाएंगे, ये कोई फायदे का रास्ता नहीं है. द राइट कॉम्बिनेशन इज व्हाटएवर यू आर एन एक्सपर्ट ऑफ, व्हाटएवर यू आर गुड एट, प्लस अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ एआई, ताकि आपको उसे यूज करना आ जाए. दैट्स ऑल यू नीड टू डू. यू आर एक्सपर्ट्स ऑफ समथिंग, यू आर इन अ ग्रेट स्पेस, बी देयर. You will remain the experts, you will always be relevant. Just make sure you keep yourself relevant. और again थोड़ा सा मैं दोबारा reinforce करना चाहूँगा उस recommendation को जो मुसलसल आई है. We have entered an era of lifelong learning. वो वक्त चला गया कि ज़िंदगी के पहले 12, 15, 20 साल पढ़ो और ज़िंदगी भर बैठ के खाओ. अब वो वक्त है where we need to keep updating our skills to stay relevant and to stay the best in our domain. So that would be the thing I would like to conclude at.
Thank you, Dr. Agha. Thank you for that brilliant comment. And you know, since my phone knew that I was researching generative AI in education, so it started sending me memes on that. And just before today's session, it sent me a joke. We know how transformational AI can be, but the joke was, this is a student saying this, my teacher told me not to worry about spelling because in the future there will be autocorrect, and for that I am eternally grapefruit. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's open the floor to any questions that our audience might have. I don't think do we have mics that can go to the audience, Ji? So please do address your question to one of the panelists. And sir, right there, Ji. We can start here perhaps. Please go ahead.
All right. So first, thank you so much for that very insightful and deep session. I think that such discussions and seminars we truly need in this time of transformative change. So first of all, I would like to address this to perhaps whatever panelist feels like that they have the most specialization in it. So how do we bring in truly representative data in the training data for large LLMs, right? So basically, we talked about how we can make that the answers that AI provides are not truly representative of the population, right? People in poverty aren't properly representative, or other people from different socio backgrounds. So how do we actually bring in such data? Because it's still going to be scraped off from the internet or other training models. So how do we actually bring in the data that represents truly the society itself?
Okay, great question. There are, और आपके question से लग रहा है कि you have a technical background, तो मैं उसमें उसी तरह से maybe let me go into a little bit of more detail of this. So you take a foundational model like GPT-4 or GPT 3.5. It is a very general model. It has been trained on the data from the internet. Now you want to apply it to a particular use case, like health or education or agriculture or whatever, and you want to tailor it down to a particular scenario. Let's say एक गांव है पाकिस्तान में जहाँ के आपने मसाइल के बारे में उससे बातचीत करनी है. Okay, there are multiple approaches. So as you know, you can start out by interacting with it as it is, figure out how good of the responses it's giving. If those are not good enough, then go to what we call few shot learning, which means थोड़ा सा उसको सिखाएं, questions दें, सही answers दें, figure out कि क्या वो समझ चुका है, is it working with that? ये कम effort से हो जाएगा. If it doesn't, then go down to the right of fine tuning, to the route of fine tuning. So fine tuning means अब ज़्यादा data उसको दें अपना local, but that still means like maybe a few thousands of instances जो सही answers की हैं, retrain it इतनी सी चीज़ के ऊपर, which will not be very hard, and then run it. If that too doesn't work and it's still too far away from the right answers, then RAG is your best solution. So RAG means that you give it the books or literature, whatever local literature you have, and then you say, don't go beyond these books in your answers. So now it'll be answering just based on those books. Let me give you an example of that. Suppose your university has a student handbook, which is like a huge book, which has everything in it. And you are interested in a particular query. Let's say मैंने course drop करना है, उसका क्या process है? And maybe there are like rules about that throughout that book. You just upload that book. You can do that right now in Bing or in GPT-4 and start asking questions about that book. It's going to give you tailored answers, which it would never have done without that book. That's RAG.
Perfect answer. The only thing I would add is कि RAG की cost जो है ना थोड़ी कम है अभी. Fine tuning की cost ज़्यादा है. So if you're going to go through the fine tuning route, the compute infrastructure that you're going to need is just massive. So that's why I get a lot of hope from the fact, one, that there's RAG that's available, and two, that there is a ton of open source LLMs available. So don't even go the route of, let's say, GPT. Find an open source LLM. उसके लिए एक सबको ही पता है Hugging Face site है. वहाँ पे अगर आप technical हैं, वहाँ पे जाएं, वहाँ से एक LLM उठाएं और उसको RAG based training अपने data पे करें तो you might get very good results.
हेलो, मेरा सवाल एक एज अ पेरेंट है. मेरा बेटा सेकंड सेमेस्टर उसने जस्ट कंप्लीट किया है, तो बट आई फील कि ही इज़ ओवरवेल्म्ड विद एआई, द प्रेजेंस ऑफ एआई. आप लोग तो बात कर रहे हैं ना उसकी इंटीग्रेशन की और उसकी कॉम्प्लीमेंट करेगा, वो असिस्ट करेगा, बट रादर जो स्टूडेंट्स हैं इन दी गुड यूनिवर्सिटीज़ एज वेल, दे आर फीलिंग थ्रेटन्ड एंड दे आर फीलिंग इन अ कंपटीशन विद एआई. तो ये तो कंपटीशन है, इस फीलिंग को कैसे हम रिमूव कर सकते हैं? टीचर्स का यहाँ पर क्या रोल है? दूसरा एक क्वेश्चन ये था कि 4 साल का जो प्रोग्राम है BSIT का, इसमें आप क्या रिकमेंड सजेस्ट करते हैं कि आफ्टर दी एडवेंट ऑफ एआई, तो इसको कैसे हम मज़ीद रिफाइन कर सकते हैं कोर्स वर्क को? थैंक यू.
Right. So you're absolutely correct in pointing out that there will be several. So let me be very frank. There will be several years of bewilderment. There will be a period of confusion for everyone, not just for the students, for the teachers, for the educators, because we have something जिसका बहुत बड़ा disruptive impact होना है, both positive and negative. तो सब कुछ होगा. Job market में भी disruption आएगी. It is, think of it कि बिजली आ गई है और अभी तक नहीं थी, और उसके आने के बाद अब सब कुछ बदल रहा है, और इवेंचुअली इट्स प्रोबेबली गोइंग टू सेटल इन अ वे वेयर इट्स गोइंग टू बिकम सो परवेसिव कि इट्स गोना बी इनविजिबल. जैसे अब हम बिजली का नहीं सोचते कुछ भी बनाते हुए, हमें पता है कि वो है मौजूद. इसी तरह शायद एआई आज से 10 साल बाद या 20 साल बाद होगी कि इट्स परवेसिव, इट्स एवरीवेयर, इट्स That's like perfect timing. Whoever did that, thank you. Yeah. So there will be a period of bewilderment. इसमें सिर्फ you need to keep reminding your kids, and also like our kids, our students, that what's setting them apart now is the same thing what's setting them apart a year and a half behind now. So like in the past. So before this generative AI, जो चीज़ उनको मुमताज़ कर रही थी वही आज भी कर रही है. वो उनकी अपनी क्रिएटिविटी है. So चाहे वो पहला ड्राफ्ट आपने चैट जीपीटी से बनवा लिया है, वो सब ने वही बनाया. So again now the thing is कि आपका बेस लेवल जो यहाँ था with AI वो यहाँ आ गया है, और सब ने वहाँ से यहाँ पहुँचने में पहले 10 दिन लगाने थे और अच्छी खासी मेहनत लगानी थी. वो उन्हें 5 मिनट में मिल गया. अब ये फिर बराबर है. अब उन्हें बेहतर नंबर किस बेस पर मिलेंगे? अब यहाँ से आगे उनकी अपनी क्रिएटिविटी. सो लिहाजा ये एक चीज़ मुझे पर्सनली बहुत इत्मीनान देती है कि आपकी क्रिएटिविटी, आपका वो डिस्टिंक्टिव फैक्टर वो नहीं बदला, वो वहीं का वहीं है. इसको याद रखें, ये ऐसे ही रहेगा, और हम अभी तक कोई ऐसा फ्यूचर सिनेरियो नहीं देख रहे जहाँ पर ये चीज़ बदल रही हो, अनलेस कि लाइक आई हैव एक्सेस टू अ डिफरेंट फॉर्म ऑफ एआई एंड यू हैव एक्सेस टू अ डिफरेंट फॉर्म ऑफ एआई व्हिच वुड नॉट बी वेरी डेमोक्रेटिक. सो अगर वो एक फ्यूचर सिनेरियो बन रहा है तो दैट्स अ डिफरेंट थिंग. दूसरा जो BSIT प्रोग्राम्स है, दैट्स अ डिबेट व्हिच हैज़ बीन, एंड आई एम वेरी थैंकफुल कि ज़्यादातर यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में इंटरनली ये शुरू हो गए हैं सारी दुनिया में कि इन प्रोग्राम्स को कैसे इंप्रूव करना है. डू वी वांट मोर टेलर्ड प्रोग्राम्स? डू वी वांट टू मेक श्योर कि अर्ली ऑन इस चीज़ को इंटीग्रेट करें? एंड येस, दैट यू गोना सी दैट हैपनिंग, बट दैट ऑल्सो नीड्स टू हैपन, जैसे हमारे पैनलिस्ट ने कहा, एट स्कूल लेवल्स. अब ये शायद वो चीज़ है जिसे हमें बहुत छोटे बच्चों से शुरू करवाना पड़ेगा कि उन्हें नो हाउ बेसिक समझ आना शुरू हो जाए. व्हाट इज़ AI? हाउ कैन इट हेल्प देम? हाउ कैन इट बी रियली हार्मफुल टू देम?
In the interest of time, could we have one more question, perhaps from a lady, to keep, the gender balance? There is a lady present right here and at the back. Could we get the mic to her, please?
Can I ask one question, please?
Ji, zarur.
Oh, acha. Yes. So, we've talked about education and how we're going to be using LLMs and chatbots and AI with students, right? So one thing that I think that we have overlooked is that using chatbots with the younger population of a country can be somewhat dangerous, because whoever is owning that AI is going to be training that AI, right? So if the young population of Pakistan is using, let's say, ChatGPT for education, the people who trained it, let's say, for example, the Americans, it's going to be giving us an American perspective. And it's going to be, maybe teaching our children the wrong thing that maybe we don't want them to learn. That could include bias and racism and some of the different aspects. For example, let's say if we ask ChatGPT about Israel and Palestinian conflict, it will definitely give you an American perspective and not the perspective that we actually need. And similarly, if we ask it about the British Empire, it's obviously going to give it, So basically, the ownership is towards the global West. How do we make AI essentially global, where it is completely independent?
So I think थोड़ा सा हमने इसको डिस्कस किया था पहले भी, right? एक तो ये बात है कि ट्रेनिंग मॉडल्स ऑफ द साइज ऑफ OpenAI's मॉडल, ChatGPT का जो मॉडल है, इज़ वेरी 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 एक्सपेंसिव. ठीक है, लेकिन what gives me hope is that there are lots and lots of models available in the open source. वो हम ले सकते हैं. Ideally तो if we have the compute resources, we should train our own LLM, right? Of that scale, which is fed with data that we provided. So we should start there. But the next best is take an existing LLM, or जो हम पहले भी बात कर रहे थे, you can use its weights and parameters and ask it to forget everything that it has been trained on, and you provide the context. You provide the Urdu books and the Urdu library or the articles that you want to provide, and ask it to restrict its responses to that. तो वो retrieval augmented generation की बात है. You can fine tune it. और मुझे ये लगता है कि for some tasks, like this is what gives me hope, right? I mean, if this is not true, then there's truly no hope, because only Microsoft and OpenAI and Google can train the foundational models of the size that they have trained. But what gives me hope is that there's a small company in France, जिसकी हम अभी बात कर रहे थे, called Mistral. Mistral के सारे models open source हैं. You get Mistral's model, and then you provide your own context, and sometimes it is now giving you responses which are better than GPT-4's responses for certain use cases. So I think the hope for us is that smaller models for particular use cases outperform the very, very large foundational model. And if this is the truth, then there's a lot of hope for us. Mere khayal mein, LUMS, I'm sure, is already doing it. Every university in Pakistan should, at least provide RAG augmented LLMs to their students. और हर कोई अपना deploy करे और अपने infrastructure पे चलाए और उसको अपने data पे train करे. This is what we should be doing to counter exactly the problem that you pointed to.
Let's take a final question, Ji, please. Could we please take a final question from the lady?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't belong to a tech background, but I read Harari's book. So some of this is coming out of fear. In a country like Pakistan, most of the people do not have access to basic education. We are facing a problem with basic education, that is class 5 and 10. And that is most of the population. And in our cities, we have like, I think 10 or 15% of our educated people, amongst which उसमें भी बहुत काम है जो IT trained है. मतलब I'm a surgeon, so मुझे नहीं पता IT का बहुत ज़्यादा. तो to ask a question is that ये जो इतना ज़्यादा gap create हो रहा है digital उसमें, we are scared of the consequences and the information that is controlled. हमारे बच्चों को ये भी नहीं पता कि उसको ऑपरेट कैसे करना है. इसका कंपाउंड इफेक्ट अगले 20 साल में बहुत बुरा है. मतलब इफ़ यू सीन द 90s तो इंडिया पाकिस्तान लगता था कि एक ही तरह की मुल्क हैं. अब अगर आप सोचो तो अब हम लोग अग्री करते हैं यूनानिमसली कि नहीं, इंडिया बहुत आगे. सो इन 20 years टाइम, डोंट यू थिंक दैट टेक प्रोफेशनल्स शुड पुश फॉर पॉलिसी ऑन अ वेरी इमरजेंसी बेसिस कि नहीं, आप ऐसे नहीं करें. हम लोगों का जो पीछे बच्चा है वो उनको बेसिक IT समझ नहीं, उनको अंग्रेज़ी समझ नहीं आ रही, उर्दू समझ, मैथ्स समझ नहीं आ रही, उनको IT सिखाएं. बिकॉज अ लार्ज पॉपुलेशन विल बी रेंडर्ड इरेलीवेंट. उनका कोई वो बेसिक ड्राइवर्स हैं, कुक्स हैं, उनकी जॉब्स जाने का वाकई ही ख़तरा है और वो रिडीम नहीं होंगी. तो मतलब आई डोंट अंडरस्टैंड इसका क्या सोल्यूशन है, या हमें एज अ पॉलिसी मेकर्स को किस तरह इन्फ्लुएंस करना चाहिए कि वो दे शुड थिंक अबाउट इट कि ये हमने अगले 20 साल में क्या करना है इसका.
नहीं, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन. एक्चुअली हमने ये बहुत डिटेल में डिस्कस भी किया था ड्यूरिंग द पैनल टॉक, एंड आई थिंक ऑल 4 of us agree with what you're saying here. तो 2 चीज़ें आई वुड लाइक टू से, पहला ये कि आई डोंट पर्सनली थिंक ब्लू कॉलर वर्कर्स को कोई थ्रेट है, उतना थ्रेट है जितना वाइट कॉलर वर्कर्स को है. बाय दैट आई मीन जिन्होंने अपने हाथ से काम करना है, जो एक्चुअल फिजिकल काम कर रहे हैं, लोग घरों में आ रहे हैं, या इवन जो आर्टिस्ट, पेंटर्स, राइटर्स, आई थिंक उनको कम ख़तरा है AI की एडवांसमेंट से. और जो ज़्यादा जिन्होंने अपना जहन यूज़ करने वाले जॉब्स हैं उनको ज़्यादा ख़तरा है. सो दैट्स वाई आई पॉइंटेड आउट कि यार क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग बिल्ड करें. सो दैट्स माई फर्स्ट पॉइंट. सेकेंड, आपकी बात 100% बिल्कुल आई कम्प्लीटली एग्री. आई थिंक इट्स हाई टाइम कि हम लोग अपनी करिकुलम्स, इसीलिए मैंने पहली बात ये की थी कि हमारा करिकुलम चेंज होने वाला है. वी हैव टू ऐड द थर्ड पिलर ऑफ ऑब्सेशन. जिस तरह हमारी 2 बड़ी ऑब्सेशंस थी हमारे मुल्क की, विच वर मेडिकल एंड इंजीनियरिंग की फील्ड्स. थर्ड ऑब्सेशन का वक्त आ गया कि आप टेक फोकस पढ़ाई करें. दैट करिकुलम, आई पर्सनली थिंक दिस इज़ अ वेरी रेडिकल व्यू. आई थिंक उसके अंदर बेसिक सब्जेक्ट्स भी नहीं होने चाहिए. प्योरली हार्ड कोर कंप्यूटिंग, टेक्निकल स्किल्स, IT स्किल्स, कंप्यूटर साइंस, प्रोग्रामिंग, कोडिंग, वॉट एवर, जो भी उसके ज़ुमरे में आता है वो सब और वो आप बिल्कुल बेसिक लेवल से शुरू करें, और आवाम को जब तक आप बताएंगे नहीं कि इसमें कितनी पावर है, वो इसको नहीं पढ़ना नहीं चाहेंगे. सो इट्स अ टू pronged अप्रोच दैट वी